she obviously made a picture of the back wound, the back photograph of JFK. Now, when you look at that back wound, I'm not a forensic pathologist, for goodness sakes. I deal with religious manuscripts. I'm the furthest thing away from a forensic pathologist. And so when in doubt, I quote people who do know something about forensic pathology. And I know on video I have both Dr. Weck and Dr. Bodden say that based on the abrasion collar, although this figure is not in the volume 7 of the HSCA, said that wound was rising at approximately 11 degrees. Now, I know Bodden and a lot of the other ones have Kennedy doing everything from toe touches to everything else in that back seat. But unless he is shot by someone in the trunk or he's doing toe touches, to me, it's a no-brainer at this point. If that wound is going upwards, there's no way that Oswald or anyone else 60 feet in the air behind can possibly be shooting Jack Kennedy. It's impossible. There is no way that that happened. So when in doubt, you move the things forward. We have the Rydberg thing. And interesting, when you look at that Rydberg illustration, by the way, that is based on Humes telling Rydberg how to set it up when Humes himself had never even seen the autopsy photographs. Talk about playing in the dark. Okay, let's go to Petty. I'm not going to say a whole lot about Petty. I'm going to say a little bit more about Humes and then say some things about John Conley. The only thing I'm going to say about Petty is what I find that very interesting is that they sandwiched Dr. Weck in between Bodden and Petty. Petty is asked 10 questions. How many times do you think he mentions Dr. Weck's name in 10 questions? 10 times. What is this testimony about? Dr. Weck? Unbelievable. Is that by accident that he sandwiched, in between these two people? Maybe. Maybe there's an actual explanation that they just wanted to do all the medical forensic pathologists in one fell swoop. I don't have a problem with that, but it seems awfully odd that when Petty is more interested in talking about why he disagrees with Dr. Weck than he is talking about, Conley's rib being just slapped and, well, I really don't think the wrist was penetrated. I don't know if you've looked at those x-rays, but it looks like more than slapping went on to that, to Conley's rib. Okay, let's go to some other things about, actually, let's go to John Conley himself. There's some things that are really overlooked, I think, with John Conley. And by the way, before we get to Conley, one final thing about Humes. In 1964, Humes says that the entry wound in the back of John Kennedy's head is about 2.5 centimeters to the right of midline, slightly above the external occipital protuberance. The Clark panel in 1968 said, no, it's really about 4 inches higher. The HSCA says, no, it's about 4 inches higher. And as you can see for Humes' testimony, there's some waffling. He seems to agree, seems to be a little unsure. He's troubled by the whole thing. He goes before the ARB, and this is just absolutely classic. Humes has shown the autopsy photographs, and they say to him, well, in 1964, you said what I just said. In 1978, you seem to change your testimony 15 years later. Dr. Humes, where is the entrance wound in the back of John Kennedy's head? And unbelievable, what he says is, I don't know. He looks at the autopsy and says, I don't know. So in 64 it's here, in 78 it's here, and by 1996, don't worry, it hasn't jumped, it has completely disappeared. So then he sends back a letter to the ARB saying, and who knows why he did this? I don't know why I do most things I do, let alone why Humes does for good. I'm not going to give him a psychological autopsy this morning. I don't know why people do the things they do, unlike Professor Ron, who seems to have the psychic abilities to know exactly why people do the things they do. I don't know why people do the things they do. The only thing I can tell you is a hard evidence where Humes writes a letter back to the ARB and says, now I'm sticking with my 1964 explanation. It was 2.5 centimeters to the right of midline and slightly above the EOP. So that was his final decision, and unfortunately he's not with us any longer, so who knows what he would say today. Let's take a look at Conley. Conley is an interesting fellow. And by the way, both the Warren Commission and the HSA chose not to believe John Conley. They really did. John Conley never believed in the single bullet theory, though he believed in a conspiracy. And by the way, you don't have to have 2 shooters to have a conspiracy, people. This notion that you have to have people positioned all over Daley Plaza like some Minutemen out there to have a conspiracy is ludicrous. You only need 1 shooter, and you can set it up easily and still have a conspiracy. Let's kind of rid ourselves of that notion of how we think about conspiracy. But let's look at John Conley. On page 42, which is the last page of what is now deemed as the Smith handouts. Cornwell says, thank you very much, Governor. Let me ask you the same question. What is your memory of the events? What did you see and hear? What happened after the limousine started down Elm Street and passed underneath the Texas School Book Depository? Listen to what he says very carefully. Mr. Cornwell, we had just turned to Elm. We had gone, I suspect, 150, 200 feet, when I heard what I thought was a rifle shot. And I thought it came from, I was seated right, as you know, the jump seat right in front of the president, and they have a fairly straight back on them, so I was sitting up fairly erect. I thought the shot came from back over my right shoulder, so I turned to see if I could catch a sight of the president out of the corner of my eye, turning to the right, because I immediately had, frankly, had fear of an assassination, because I thought it was a rifle shot. I didn't think it was a blowout or explosion of any kind. I didn't see the president. Please don't lose that. He is sitting so far to the right of John F. Kennedy that when he turns to the right, he can't see him. Well, now, if the single bullet theory is true, then he has to be not to the right, he's got to be to the left of Kennedy, because that bullet is traveling from right to left. But he is so far to the right that when he turns, he can't even see Kennedy. If he is positioned, as Professor Ron said up this morning, a meager glance, he ought to be able to see John Kennedy, but he can't. And that's why he turns back to his left, and at that point feels the impact of a bullet. But I don't think we can underestimate or undermine the testimony of John Connally, who over and over again said he did not believe in the single bullet theory, did not think that the same bullet that hit him hit John Kennedy, and he was in the car, for goodness sakes. He knew about rifles. He was an experienced hunter. Yet the Warren Commission and the HSCA chose not to believe John Connally, which is very, very strange, I think. What's interesting is that when we talk about, the famous lapel flip, and we've already seen the photographs of where the bullet in John Connally's coat is too far down for the lapel flip. The fact of the matter is, again, I look at manuscripts. I don't know anything about physics, for goodness sakes, but I know this, that bullet, every frame that the Zapruder film goes by, which is 1/18th of a second, that bullet has traveled approximately 130 feet for every Zapruder frame that goes by. Kennedy obviously shows disturbances before frame 224, so it can't be 224 where that lapel is flipping, because at that point, that bullet is way through John Connally, the limousine, in the city of Dallas, for goodness sakes. From a physics standpoint, it is impossible to suggest that at frame 224, that is when the bullet goes through. It is going at 1,000th of a second, for goodness sakes. Can't possibly be there. Well, let me close by saying this. I don't have any idea how much time I have left. I talk 90 miles an hour, I know that. How much? Oh, very good, very good. I'm impressed. There's a famous poem by Emily Dickinson that I want to quote, with actually just a few lines from the poem that, as far as I'm concerned, really exemplifies both the Warren Commission, a lot of what the HSCA did. It's a very famous poem by Emily Dickinson called "I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died." Hands down my famous Dickinson poem. And in there she talks about willing her keepsakes away, which suggests that there are things that she can't will away, which most people interpret that, the metaphysical aspect of a human being, the whole notion of the soul. And then she talks about, with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz, the notion that how can buzzing noise be associated with color? Well, I think Dickinson has this notion that as the individual gets close to death, the senses so merge on one another that you really can't tell the difference between whether it's hearing, whether it's seeing, whether it's smelling, and the senses almost become one at that point. And then she says, at that point, as I think the senses of both the Warren Commission and the HSC to a large part did, as their senses begin to merge, I think the same thing happened to them, as Emily Dickinson closes her poem with one of the greatest closing lines ever in a poem when she says, at that point, I could not see to see. Thank you very much.